First story: The Haunting in Room 204. In a small town nestled in the heart of the countryside, there stood an old inn, the kind with creaky floors and a history that stretched back over a century. This inn was known as the Whistler's Rest, and it held a dark secret, one that the locals whispered about but rarely discussed openly. Room 204 was the epicenter of the inn's eerie reputation. Guests who stayed in Room 204 often complained of strange occurrences: cold drafts in the middle of summer, soft whispers that seemed to come from the walls, and the unsettling feeling of being watched. Despite these stories, the room remained a popular choice, its mystery drawing in thrill-seekers and skeptics alike. One such guest was Emma, a travel blogger with a passion for debunking ghost stories. She checked into Room 204 on a chilly autumn evening, determined to prove that the hauntings were nothing more than overactive imaginations and old building noises. She set up her camera equipment, ready to document her stay and expose the myths surrounding the room. As night fell, Emma settled into the antique four-poster bed, the heavy drapes pulled tightly shut. The room was silent, save for the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards. Hours passed uneventfully, and Emma began to feel a sense of triumph. There was nothing to fear here. But at precisely 3:15 a.m., she was jolted awake by a sudden drop in temperature. Her breath hung in the air, visible in the icy cold. She reached for her phone, intending to check the time, but it was dead. Confused, she glanced at her camera equipment. It too had shut off despite being fully charged. Then she heard a faint, mournful whistle, the kind one might hear in an old, forgotten melody. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she strained to listen, hoping to identify the source. The whistling grew louder, more insistent, and was soon accompanied by a soft, rhythmic tapping, as if someone were gently knocking on the walls. Emma's fear turned to terror when she noticed the shadows in the room beginning to move. Shapes formed in the darkness, coalescing into the outline of a figure standing at the foot of her bed. The figure was indistinct but undeniably human, and it seemed to be watching her with unseen eyes. Gathering her courage, Emma called out, "Who's there?" Her voice trembled, barely more than a whisper. The figure remained silent, but the whistling stopped abruptly, replaced by an oppressive silence. Suddenly, the figure lunged forward, and Emma felt a cold hand grip her wrist. She screamed and pulled away, tumbling out of bed and scrambling for the door. As she fled the room, she heard the figure's footsteps following her, echoing her own frantic pace. She didn't stop until she reached the lobby, where the night manager found her, pale and shaking. Emma left the Whistler's Rest the next morning, abandoning her plans to debunk the haunting of Room 204. She never published her footage or spoke of her experience publicly, but those who knew her noticed a change. The confident, fearless blogger now had a haunted look in her eyes, as if she carried the weight of a dark secret. And Room 204? It remains, as it always has been, an enigma wrapped in shadows, waiting for the next brave soul to uncover its mysteries. But those who dare to stay should heed the warnings of those who came before. Some doors are better left unopened, and some spirits are best left undisturbed. In the heart of a bustling city, there was a high-rise apartment building known for its modern amenities and luxurious lifestyle. However, apartment 1204 on the 12th floor held a reputation that was anything but glamorous. Rumors circulated among the residents about strange occurrences in the apartment, but no one could quite put their finger on what was wrong. Emma, a recent college graduate, was thrilled when she found a roommate, Sarah, to share apartment 1204 with her. The rent was affordable, and the view of the city's skyline was breathtaking. The two women quickly became friends, enjoying their new life in the city. For the first few weeks, Everything was perfect. Emma and Sarah had settled into a comfortable routine, sharing meals, laughing at late-night TV shows, and exploring the city together. But then, things began to change. It started with small, inexplicable events. Emma would come home to find the lights flickering, even though she was sure she had turned them off before leaving. Objects seemed to move on their own. A book she left on the coffee table would mysteriously end up on the kitchen counter. At first, she dismissed these incidents as forgetfulness or the product of a tired mind. One evening, Emma returned from work to find the apartment unusually quiet. Sarah, who was usually home by then, was nowhere to be found. Her phone went straight to voicemail, and there was no note or message explaining her absence. Concerned, Emma decided to wait, assuming Sarah had gone out with friends and forgotten to inform her. As the hours passed, Emma's worry grew. She called their mutual friends, but no one had seen or heard from Sarah. By midnight, panic had set in. Emma contacted the building's management and the police, reporting Sarah missing. The police conducted a thorough search of the apartment and the building, but found no clues to Sarah's whereabouts. There was no sign of a struggle, and Sarah's belongings were still in the apartment. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. In the days that followed, Emma struggled to cope with the loss of her friend and the eerie silence that now filled the apartment. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, and at night, she often heard faint whispers and footsteps echoing through the halls. Sleep eluded her, and the once cozy apartment became a place of dread. One night, as Emma lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she felt a cold breeze sweep through the room. She glanced at the window, but it was shut tight. The whispers grew louder, and the temperature dropped drastically. Emma sat up, her heart pounding, and saw a shadowy figure standing at the foot of her bed. The figure was indistinct, but she could make out the outline of a woman. The air was filled with an overwhelming sense of sadness and longing. The figure slowly moved closer, and Emma recognized Sarah's face, pale and ghostly. "Sarah?" Emma whispered, her voice trembling. The figure didn't respond, but extended a hand towards Emma, a look of desperation in her eyes. Emma felt a wave of sorrow wash over her as she reached out to touch her friend. As soon as their hands met, the figure vanished, and the room returned to normal. Shaken, Emma knew she couldn't stay in apartment 1204 any longer. She moved out the next day, leaving behind the memories and the unanswered questions. She never found out what happened to Sarah, but she couldn't escape the feeling that her friend was still there, trapped between worlds, trying to reach out for help. Apartment 1204 remains empty to this day, its dark history keeping new tenants at bay. Those who live in the building speak in hushed tones about the vanished roommate and the ghostly presence that lingers, waiting for someone to uncover the truth. In an old Victorian house that had seen better days lived a woman named Lisa. She had inherited the house from her late grandmother and moved in with hopes of restoring it to its former glory. The house was filled with antique furniture and curious relics, but the most striking feature was an enormous ornate mirror in the master bedroom. Lisa was drawn to the mirror from the moment she saw it. It stood over 7 feet tall, framed with intricate carvings of ivy and roses, and the glass was impeccably clear despite its age. However, there was something unsettling about the mirror that Lisa couldn't quite place. For the first few nights, Lisa slept fitfully, disturbed by strange dreams. She dreamt of the house as it had been decades ago, filled with people she didn't recognize. In her dreams, she would see a woman who looked strikingly like her, but dressed in old-fashioned clothing. The woman would often stand in front of the mirror, brushing her hair or staring into the glass with a look of deep sorrow. One evening, after a particularly long day of renovations, Lisa fell into a deep sleep and found herself once again in the dream version of the house. This time, she was standing in front of the mirror, and the woman was standing beside her. The woman turned to Lisa and spoke in a soft, mournful voice, "You must help me." Lisa woke with a start, her heart pounding. She glanced at the mirror, half expecting to see the woman from her dreams staring back at her, but it was just her own reflection. Determined to uncover the mystery, Lisa began to research the history of the house and its previous occupants. She discovered that the house had belonged to a wealthy family in the early 1900s. The eldest daughter, Eleanor, was known for her beauty and grace, but had mysteriously disappeared one night, never to be seen again. The family had been devastated, and the house had changed hands several times before coming into Lisa's possession. Convinced that the woman in her dreams was Eleanor, Lisa decided to investigate further. She searched the house for any clues, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary until she examined the back of the mirror. There, she found a hidden compartment containing an old diary. The diary belonged to Eleanor and detailed her life, her hopes and dreams, and her growing fear of an unseen presence that haunted her. The final entry was particularly chilling. "I see her in the mirror. She looks just like me, but she is not me. She whispers to me, tells me things I do not want to hear. I am afraid she will take me away." Lisa realized that Eleanor had been tormented by the same figure she had seen in her dreams. Determined to free Eleanor's spirit, she sought the help of a local historian and a medium. Together, they conducted a séance in front of the mirror, hoping to make contact with Eleanor and lay her spirit to rest. As they began, the room grew cold, and the mirror fogged up as if someone were breathing on it from the other side. The medium spoke softly, calling out to Eleanor, urging her. Fourth story, The Whispers in the Attic. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, there stood an old house with a reputation for being haunted. Its exterior was weathered and worn, and many of the windows were boarded up. Despite its eerie appearance, a young couple named Mark and Emily decided to buy the house, hoping to renovate it and start a family. The first few weeks went by uneventfully as they cleaned and repaired the main rooms. However, they had yet to explore the attic, a space rumored to be the source of the house's hauntings. One rainy afternoon, curiosity got the best of them, and they decided to investigate. The attic was dark and dusty, filled with old furniture, boxes of forgotten belongings, and cobwebs in every corner. As they sorted through the clutter, they found an old trunk tucked away in a corner. Inside, they discovered a collection of faded photographs, letters, and a worn-out diary. The diary belonged to a young girl named Lily who had lived in the house many years ago. Her entries were filled with the typical musings of a teenager, but as they read on, the tone of the diary changed. Lily wrote about hearing strange whispers in the attic at night, voices that called her name and told her secrets. She described feeling watched and waking up with unexplained bruises. One entry, dated the night before her disappearance, was particularly disturbing. "The whispers are louder tonight. They say they want me to join them. I'm scared. I don't want to go, but they say I have no choice." As Mark and Emily read the final entry, a cold draft swept through the attic, and they heard faint whispers echoing around them. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and seemed to come from all directions. Panic set in as they realized they were not alone. Emily spotted a small, hidden door at the back of the attic, partially covered by an old curtain. The whispers seemed to be emanating from behind it. Gathering their courage, they opened the door to reveal a tiny, windowless room. Inside, they found a single, dusty chair facing the wall, and the air was thick with an oppressive, malevolent presence. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind them, and the whispers turned into angry shouts. The temperature dropped drastically, and they felt an unseen force pushing them towards the chair. Desperately, they pushed back, managing to open the door and flee the attic. Breathless and terrified, they decided to seek help from a paranormal investigator. The investigator, a seasoned expert named Claire, agreed to come to the house the following day. She conducted a thorough investigation, setting up cameras and recording equipment throughout the attic. As night fell, Claire, Mark, and Emily gathered in the living room to review the footage. What they saw chilled them to the bone. The cameras captured ghostly figures moving in the attic, their faces twisted in anguish. The whispers were audible, a chorus of voices repeating the same phrase, "Join us." Claire explained that the house had a dark history. It was built on the site of an old orphanage that had burned down, trapping many children inside. The spirits of those children were still trapped in the attic, unable to move on. Lily had been sensitive to their presence, and they had tried to communicate with her, ultimately leading to her disappearance. To free the spirits, Claire performed a cleansing ritual, urging the restless souls to find peace and move towards the light. As she chanted, the air in the house grew warmer, and the oppressive feeling began to lift. The whispers faded, replaced by a sense of calm. After the ritual, the house felt different. The attic, once a place of fear, was now just an ordinary storage space. Mark and Emily continued their renovations, turning the house into a warm and welcoming home. They kept Lily's diary as a reminder of the spirits they had helped to free, grateful for the peace that now filled their lives. From that day on, they never heard the whispers again. The house, once haunted by the past, became a place of new beginnings and happy memories. Fifth story, the ghost of Hollow Creek Mansion. In the remote countryside, hidden among ancient oaks and overgrown hedges, stood Hollow Creek Mansion. The mansion had been abandoned for decades, its grandeur faded, and its halls silent. Local legends told of a ghost that haunted the mansion, a woman in white who roamed the corridors at night, searching for something or someone. Despite the rumors, a historian named John decided to buy the mansion. He was fascinated by its history and believed that restoring the old house could uncover many forgotten stories. John moved in with his dog, Max, and began the long process of renovation. From the first night, John felt an eerie presence in the mansion. He would hear faint footsteps echoing through the empty halls and see fleeting shadows out of the corner of his eye. Max, usually calm and friendly, would growl at unseen entities and refuse to enter certain rooms. One evening, as John was working in the library, he found an old, dust-covered book hidden behind a loose brick in the fireplace. The book was a diary, its pages brittle with age. It belonged to a woman named Eliza, who had lived in the mansion over a century ago. Eliza's diary painted a picture of a life filled with joy and sorrow. She wrote of her love for her husband, Henry, and the happiness they shared in the mansion. But the entries grew darker, revealing her anguish after Henry's sudden death. Eliza believed that Henry had been murdered, and she was determined to find his killer. The final entry in the diary was particularly haunting. "I feel his presence. He calls to me from beyond the grave. I must find the truth, even if it means joining him in death." Intrigued and disturbed, John decided to investigate further. He spent hours in the local archives, uncovering the history of Hollow Creek Mansion and its inhabitants. He discovered that Henry's death had been ruled an accident, but there were rumors of foul play. Eliza had disappeared shortly after his death, and her fate remained a mystery. One stormy night, as John was preparing for bed, he heard a soft sobbing coming from the attic. Grabbing a flashlight, he and Max cautiously made their way up the creaky stairs. The sobbing grew louder, more desperate, as they approached the attic door. When John opened the door, he was met with a chilling sight. In the center of the attic stood the translucent figure of a woman dressed in a flowing white gown. Her face was pale and mournful, her eyes filled with sorrow. John realized he was seeing the ghost of Eliza. "Eliza," John whispered, "I found your diary. I know about Henry." The ghost turned to face him, her expression softening. She reached out a hand, and John felt a cold breeze brush against his skin. The sobbing stopped, replaced by a hushed silence. Eliza began to speak, her voice echoing in the attic. "Help me find him," she pleaded. "Help me find peace." Determined to help the restless spirit, John searched the attic for any clues. Behind a stack of old trunks, he discovered a hidden compartment in the wall. Inside, he found a box containing letters and a small, blood-stained knife. The letters revealed a sinister plot to kill Henry for his fortune, orchestrated by a trusted family friend. Armed with this new evidence, John contacted the authorities, who reopened the case. The truth about Henry's murder finally came to light, and the family friend was posthumously implicated in the crime. That night, John returned to the attic. Eliza's ghost appeared once more, but this time, her expression was one of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her form becoming less distinct. "I can rest now." As Eliza's spirit faded, the air in the attic grew warmer, and a sense of peace settled over the mansion. John continued his renovations, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The ghost of Hollow Creek Mansion had found her closure, and the house, once filled with sorrow, was now a place of healing and new beginnings. John often felt a gentle, comforting presence in the mansion, as if Eliza was watching over him and Max. The local legends of the haunted mansion gradually changed, telling of the historian who brought peace to the ghost and restored the mansion to its former glory. The phantom of Old Willow Inn. Nestled on the outskirts of a sleepy town, Old Willow Inn had stood for over a century. The inn had once been a bustling haven for travelers, but it had fallen into disrepair after a tragic fire claimed the lives of several guests and the innkeeper, Mr. Harrington, many decades ago. The locals spoke in hushed tones about the inn being haunted, but no one had dared to investigate the claims until Lucy arrived. Lucy, a writer with a fascination for the supernatural, decided to spend a week at Old Willow Inn to gather material for her new book. The inn had recently been purchased and partially restored by a distant relative of the original owner, who had decided to open it to guests. When Lucy checked in, she found the inn charming, but undeniably eerie. The walls seemed to whisper secrets, and shadows lingered a bit too long in the corners. On her first night, Lucy stayed in room 4, which was said to be the most haunted. As she unpacked her belongings, she noticed an old, ornate key on the nightstand. Curious, she picked it up and examined it. It felt cold to the touch, and as she held it, she felt a sudden chill run down her spine. She decided to keep it with her, thinking it might unlock a part of the inn that had remained closed for years. That night, as Lucy was drifting off to sleep, she was awakened by the sound of soft, melancholy piano music. It seemed to come from the parlor downstairs. Intrigued, she grabbed her notebook and ventured out of her room to investigate. As she descended the grand staircase, the music grew louder, filling the otherwise silent inn with a haunting melody. Lucy entered the parlor and saw an old, dust-covered piano in the corner. No one was there, but the keys were moving on their own, playing a sorrowful tune. She approached the piano cautiously, her heart pounding. The music stopped abruptly as she neared, and she heard a faint whisper, "Find the truth." Determined to uncover the mystery, Lucy spent the next day exploring the inn. She spoke with the staff and learned more about the fire that had taken the lives of the guests and Mr. Harrington. According to the legend, Mr. Harrington's spirit had remained in the inn, searching for justice. Some believed he had been wrongly accused of starting the fire. Lucy remembered the old key she had found and decided to see if it fit any of the doors in the inn. After several failed attempts, she finally found a small, hidden door behind a large painting in the hallway. The key turned smoothly in the lock, and the door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading to the basement. With a flashlight in hand, Lucy descended into the darkness. The basement was filled with old furniture, crates, and forgotten memorabilia. In a dusty corner, she found a locked trunk. Using the key once more, she opened it to discover a collection of letters, photographs, and a charred diary belonging to Mr. Harrington. The diary entries revealed that Mr. Harrington had been investigating suspicious activities of a guest named Mr. Blackwood, who had a history of arson and fraud. The night of the fire, Mr. Harrington had confronted Mr. Blackwood, suspecting him of planning something sinister. The final entry was hastily written, detailing Mr. Harrington's fear for the safety of his guests and his determination to stop Mr. Blackwood. Lucy realized that Mr. Harrington had died trying to protect his guests, and that his spirit remained trapped, seeking to clear his name. Armed with this new information, she contacted the local historical society and presented the evidence. The case was reopened, and after a thorough investigation, Mr. Harrington was posthumously exonerated. That night, as Lucy prepared to leave the inn, she felt a gentle breeze and saw a faint glowing figure standing at the top of the grand staircase. It was Mr. Harrington, his expression one of peace and gratitude. He nodded to Lucy before slowly fading away, his spirit finally at rest. Old Willow Inn began to attract new guests, drawn by its rich history and the story of the brave innkeeper who had protected his guests. Lucy's book became a bestseller, and she often returned to the inn, feeling a deep connection to the place and its ghostly protector. The inn, once a place of tragedy, had become a symbol of courage and redemption, thanks to the phantom of Old Willow Inn.